2 years after Michigan joined the Union, a dilapidated poorhouse was renovated into a vibrant healthcare facility through which a self-sufficient community evolved. Over 7,000 people took part in what would be known as Eloise, Michigan, a community that was self-sufficient in every possible way, from the food that they consumed to the shoes on their feet. The atmosphere resonated with compassion, and Eloise was a place where employees became friends and patients became family. The origins of Eloise can be traced back to a vote by the residents in the city of Detroit on March 8, 1832. With its passing, funds were appropriated to erect the Wayne County Poorhouse, as it was originally known. Once established, Detroit sent its indigents, mentally ill, sick, and orphaned children to reside at the poorhouse. Its role was similar to today's homeless shelters, and its first location was 2 miles outside of Detroit at the intersection of Gratiot and Mount Elliott Avenue in Hamtramck Township. Many children orphaned by the cholera epidemic of 1834 were sent to take up residence in the less than desirable housing of the Wayne County Poorhouse. Reverend Martin Kundig, a Roman Catholic priest, was appointed as the first official commissioner of the poor in Detroit and assigned to oversee the poorhouse. A compassionate administrator, Father Kundig bankrupted himself during the epidemic by exhausting his personal assets and helping the afflicted. Finally, in 1842, Father Kundig decided to leave the Wayne County Poorhouse and relocated in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. After Kundig's departure, an upgrade to the decrepit poorhouse apparently became necessary. However, renovating and adding on to the existing poorhouse in Detroit would prove impossible due to the high cost of land within the city limits. Consequently, a new location was sought outside the city limits. Eventually, county officials went 16 miles west of Detroit and bought 280 acres for a new facility at a cost of $800. One benefit of the relocation purchase was the inclusion of the Black Horse Tavern, a stagecoach stop that was included in the deal. The tavern was known to travelers for its whiskey special, 15 cents a gallon, and correspondingly hourly bar brawls. The 280-acre tract of land was located along the only road that stretched from Detroit to Chicago in Nankin Township, now known as the City of Westland. 35 of the 146 people living at the original poorhouse in Hamtramck transferred to the new location in April of 1839. In this era, it took 2 days to travel by stagecoach from Hamtramck to Nankin Township, and 111 poorhouse residents refused to relocate to the new location because rural Nankin Township was undeveloped and known to be the wilderness. The second-generation poorhouse was made up of 3 buildings. The log cabin, formerly known as the Black Horse Tavern, became the keeper's headquarters. An A-frame building was erected to house the inmates, and there was a small frame cookhouse behind the log cabin. As time went on, more space was needed, so a new brick building was constructed in 1846 to house the keeper and his family, in addition to the older and more feeble inmates. The other inmates took up residence in the A-frame building. A section of the basement in the new brick building was used to house drunks and unruly inmates. Chains were actually fastened to the walls and used as restraints. 10 years after the additions were completed, an extension to the east of the brick building was made in 1856. It included a finished basement complete with a dining room, bakery, and furnace room. A vegetable garden and cherry orchard were also planted in front of the building. As scheduled, another 10 years passed when the new keeper's residence was added. This new building provided an office, a storeroom for the clerk, a meeting room for the superintendents of the poor, and a guest bedroom for the resident physician to use. The complex was expanding. The main building and wings built upwards and grew to 3 stories for more space in 1876 due to the growing population. 12 years after this, in 1888, a new structure was created between the county house and the asylum building for general administrative use. This multifunctional complex housed the infrastructure that Eloise would need to evolve itself into a self-sufficient community. Services housed in this building included a butcher shop, a hospital ward for insane male inmates, a chapel, a board office, and a number of other administrative offices. Later in 1894, the 4th county house was built to keep up with the growing size of the institution. At its height, Eloise was comprised of 78 buildings located on 902 acres of land. This once thriving community, which spanned the corner of Michigan Avenue and Merriman, has changed. The series of expansions to Eloise in the 1800s resulted in the emergence of one of Michigan's earliest and most noteworthy stories, one that remains largely untold. Known in the beginning as the Wayne County House, by the turn of the century the extraordinary premises of Eloise were ready and equipped to provide healthcare services to Michigan. As a government-funded institution, Eloise vowed to provide medical care to every citizen in need, while also supplying emergency care to all, without regard to race, creed, color, national origin, source of payment, religion, sex, age, or handicap. Since its closure in 1981, what was once one of the largest mental hospitals in America is now lost among a backdrop of weeds and rubble. The few freestanding buildings that do remain pay homage to the late great community of Eloise, as do the remaining citizens whose memories have not yet faded. In 1894, mail for the staff and residents of the Wayne County Poorhouse was directed to the post office in the village of Wayne. It was inconvenient to send a carriage down Michigan Avenue to pick up the mail on a daily basis, so a request to establish a post office on the grounds of the Wayne County Institution was sent to the federal government. It is this request that gave the historic institution and community its name. The United States Postal Service in Washington, D.C. agreed to the request and asked the institution officials for a name for the new post office. After a series of possible names had been submitted for consideration, the postal authorities decided that none of the names suggested were acceptable. Finally, the governing board at the Wayne Institution submitted one last name, Eloise. This was in honor of little Eloise Dickerson, the 4-year-old daughter of Freeman B. Dickerson, the postmaster of Detroit. Washington officials accepted the name, and Eloise became the new post office on July 20th, 1894. The Michigan Central Railroad Company adopted Eloise as the name for the railway station established on the grounds. Eventually, the name Eloise was used when referring to the Wayne County Institution so frequently that it quickly became the name of the entire institution. The governing board made the name official, and it remained so until 1945. In 1945, the institution was renamed the Wayne County General Hospital and Infirmary at Eloise, Michigan. In 1979, the Eloise post office doors closed, and all official duties were transferred to the City of Westland Post Office. Mrs. Eloise Dickerson Davok, the namesake of the Eloise Institution, passed away in 1982, 3 years after the closing of the Eloise Post Office. She was 93.
My father was from New Hampshire, and he, after graduating from medical school, joined the Army, and he went to France, and he had a field hospital over there. And when he came home, he was still quite young. And he got in with the wrong crowd, he felt he had to get away from home. So he applied for a job at Eloise, and he got it as a psychiatrist. And my mother worked there as a secretary. She was from Plymouth, and that's how they met, and they were married. Sure. I was born at Eloise Hospital in our apartment house, and the reason that happened rather than going to a hospital, because, well, I was born in 1926, and back then hospitals were mixing up babies, and my mother was so afraid that her baby would be mixed up, so she said no, she was having us at home. My brother was born at home also, and so I said there probably are times when she wished that she might have had me at the hospital, but she was a good mom, and she stayed with me until she was 98 years old. There were several kids on the grounds besides my brother and I, because the fathers that were employed by the hospital had to live on the grounds if they were heads of the different departments. And so there were probably 10 or 12 of us that lived there. And we went to North School over on Palmer Road near Merriman. Our moms would walk us over there because there was a building at the hospital called N Building where a lot of the indigents or tramps or pogies would come and stay in the winter. And they were always afraid over in the wooded area that they might come over there, so they would always walk us to school. Kids from school loved to come and visit because it was, you know, the mystique about living there. And people that didn't live there always wondered what it was like. And they always imagined all these wonderful things that went on, these exciting things. But to us, it was just home. We didn't even think about it, but they loved to come. And my relatives, my cousins, loved to come and stay overnight. They thought that was superb. They'd still talk about it as old as we are. Well, we did the same things for fun things to do that other kids did. We, you know, would play hide and seek and kick the can and tag and all that sort of thing. We were all like family. We were different age groups. My brother, there were guys that were his age and a lot that were my age. We didn't have any that were much younger than we were. Later on, other, you know, hospital personnel moved in, and they had younger children. But, you know, we were all a very tight-knit group. One thing we did that was different was we would go in the evening sometimes over there in the corner of Merriman and Michigan, inside the fence, of course, and we'd sit on the benches and watch the cars that would go by. And people were always very curious, going by the hospital, of course. They always were hoping they would see something exciting. And so we would wait until we would see a car come, and we would get up off the bench, and we would grab a hold of the bars on the fence, and we would yell and holler, and they would look at us, and they would turn and go back down Merriman, back down Michigan Avenue, come around again, because we always, you know, felt that we didn't want to disappoint them. And so we would give them a good show. And I'm sure that our parents never knew that we did this. No one ever told them, I'm sure. Right next, the building that we were connected with was called the Terrace, and a lot of people had rooms there that worked there. And I know on 4th of July when we would go out and get tin cans and put firecrackers out of the tin cans and shoot them off, that the employees that had to work nights and had just gotten back to go to sleep were never too thrilled with that. But we figured that was a once-a-year shot, and they could put up with it. Yes, we had, at the hospital, we had the tall lamp posts with the lights on them. Now they're very retro. Everybody likes them on the streets because they're so old-fashioned looking. Well, we had them all the time. That was just current events for us. And we would be out, and of course they'd always turn on the lights at nighttime. And when the lights came on, nobody had to call us to come in. We knew when the lights came on, it was time to get in the house. And we never had any problems. I used to walk around there when I was older. I would come home from Wayne, and it would be late at night, it would be dark. I never worried. I never thought a thing about anything happening. I never had a problem, never saw anybody have a problem. There was a big pond. I don't even know if it's still there, across from Michigan Avenue, across from the hospital. And we used to go over there ice skating, and people from all over the area would come and join us. And we had bonfires over there at the ice rink, and it was great fun, great fun. Well, as I said before, I went to North School over on Palmer, road near the hospital. And then we went to the old Wayne High School, which I don't think is even there anymore. Remember, this was long before there was Westland or any of these, in the middle school or junior high. It was just, elementary school, and then you went to the high school. And some of the kids from the hospital went to Dearborn High, some went to St. Mary's, and we went to the old Wayne High School. When I was at high school, I would go to, maybe up in Seabelly, which was the general hospital, and sit up in the amphitheater and watch a surgery, or maybe go in the morgue and visit somebody that I knew there, or just things that other people would never get to do. I didn't do it all the time, but I certainly did it. I didn't know it at the time, but I'm so thankful that I did grow up there, because I really feel like it helped me, and with other people, made me more understanding, made me more accepting. Oh no, I wouldn't have wanted to live anywhere else.
A self-sufficient community, Eloise needed a way to protect its structures from fire. Combine wooden structures and kerosene lamps and you have an instant fire hazard. Fire was always a threat at Eloise. In 1864, the school building burned to the ground, followed by the horse barn a few years later. At this time, the man-powered bucket brigade was probably all the fire protection any community could muster. These two consequential losses brought focus to the fact that there needed to be some form of fire protection inside the institution. Always self-sufficient, Eloise wanted more. One attempt involved wooden barrels filled with water and placed on elevated shelves in ward halls. In theory, the shelves would collapse and the barrels would fall, releasing water to hopefully put out the fire. Sadly, the barrels deteriorated, leaked, and had a host of other problems, including freezing solid in winter. They were finally eliminated and replaced with water buckets and axes. With the help of the Detroit Fire Department, on April 17, 1909, the superintendents established a fire department under the direction of a professional fireman who was named the first chief. Assisting the chief were 5 pipemen, 5 laddermen, an assistant, and 6 substitutes. That same year, 12 oilskin coats, 12 pairs of rubber boots, 600 feet of 2.5-inch hose, ceiling hooks, 325 feet of ladders, access ropes, hose ladders, and wrecking hoods were bought. All the necessary equipment which would make their department fully operational. This 1919 Ford Model T fire engine originally served at Eloise from 1919 until 1932. Equipped with 2 portable lanterns, a manual hand-cranked siren, a fire bell, hose reel with 1-inch hose, 2 9-foot wooden ladders, and the brilliant red paint with gold leaf that set a style still in use today. This was state-of-the-art. Sadly, it was not smooth sailing for the fledgling fire department. In December 1919, the blacksmith shop at the asylum was destroyed by a fire. It was a wooden building that burned down before the fire department arrived. In March 1923, a fire broke out at 11 a.m. in the upper floor of the northeast wing of E Building. E Building housed 250 female patients, most of them bedridden and helpless. That morning there were strong gusts of wind which fanned the flames so it grew quickly. The Eloise Fire Department rushed to the scene to discover that hydrant pressure wasn't high enough to shoot streams of water to the top floor. Neighboring departments from Wayne and Dearborn came, but couldn't offer much help because their equipment was similar. A call was placed to the Detroit Fire Department, which rushed to the scene from 16 miles away. Eloise staff bravely evacuated those patients in the most danger first. With the help of the Detroit Fire Department, the fire was finally controlled and extinguished. but not before the entire roof, attic, and ceiling of the third floor was destroyed. 2 patients lost their lives.
On Wednesday afternoons, the fire department always had a fire drill. And it could be anywhere on the Eloise grounds, the fire drill. And often I would walk with the fire chief and go and pull the alarm. And then after the fire trucks would come and they would do their drill, then I would ride back in the truck back to the fire station.
In 1929, the fire department's quarters was housed in what had been the old asylum laundry, and a 21-foot extension was made to the building. The top floor was for the chief and his family, and the lower floor was for the firefighting equipment. In 1932, the building was remodeled. Beginning in 1950, all of the hospital firemen were required to attend the Detroit Fire Academy for 240 hours of formal training. At its full strength, the fire department consisted of 18 men, the chief, the lieutenant, 2 sergeants, and 14 firefighters. Eventually, by 1978, the fire brigade dwindled to only 8 men until the facility's closure in 1984.
At Christmas time, it was always a very special time because we had a huge tree, which I thought was huge at that time, Christmas tree, that they would decorate with lights, and they would take the patients that were able to go, they would dress them warmly, and they would go out and have a Christmas carol sing under the tree. Now I look at that tree and it isn't so humongous after all, but in my mind I still see it as that beautiful thing. Between the greenhouse and the firehouse, there was just a little walkway so you could go between the 2 buildings. And that's something I always have remembered. The icicles in the winter were the most gorgeous, long, pointed icicles I've ever seen. That whole strip. It was just something about the way that they fell there. I used to love to go through there and snap them off. They were great.
Christmas time, it was very festival. Everybody decorated our office. We always decorated. We went down, and I can't remember the nursery that was right off Merriman Road. They used to sell Christmas trees, so we'd go down there and they'd donate a couple small Christmas trees, and we'd have them on top of our file cabinets, and we'd have it all decorated. So we were very festive.
The General Hospital had a lot of departments, and they had a fantastic nursery for newborns. And they would have like a reunion every year, a Christmas party for all the preemies that some of them, they didn't think that they would make it because they were born with very low birth weights. So every year they'd have like a reunion for those, and we'd have Christmas parties. Some of the doctors would be Santa Clauses and things like that, and it was very pleasant.
And in the auditorium at Christmas time, Father Jerome, who was a Catholic priest, would have services. And I'm not Catholic, but I was always so impressed because in the back row, you would have lots of people there at the service, but in the back row was always the policemen. And they would come in with their guns and their full, paraphernalia, and they would sit there and worship in their own way. And I was always so impressed that they took time to do that.
Until 1841, inmates of the county house were not classified psychologically. No medical distinction was made between the rational and the irrational. A female inmate named Bridget Hughes was the first patient admitted with a diagnosis of psychosis, a psychiatric disorder often marked by hallucinations, incoherence, and distorted perceptions of reality. Bridget remained a patient at Eloise for over 50 years until her death on March 8, 1895. In these early years of treating mental illness, gender was the only way patients were segregated. Eloise historian Alvin Clark wrote, "Babies, children, old men, blind people, the idiotic, the rational, and the crazy were all huddled together in a miscellaneous unit." Sadly, little was known about psychosis during this time. The criminally insane that were sent from the Detroit House of Corrections were not segregated to protect the other residents of the poorhouse. When a patient reacted violently, few options were considered other than to physically restrain the inmate. The hospital at Eloise was forced into action in 1867 because the state of Michigan didn't supply a sufficient number of quarters at the newly built Michigan Asylum in Kalamazoo. Only curable female patients were accepted in Kalamazoo. Meanwhile, at Eloise, the first asylum building was erected in 1868 because conditions became intolerable due to the swelling number of incurable psychosis.